Well, hey, thanks so much for joining us at Harvest Online. We're so glad you decided to continue to track with us here in our series Taboo, Champion the Untouchables. If you're watching a Harvest Home, I hope you guys are doing great today and really excited that you guys are in a Harvest Home. So have you ever had someone owe you something? Maybe they borrowed something from you, and so you're waiting to get it back. Maybe you loaned them some money and you're waiting to get that back. Because when somebody owes us something, the only way to really cancel that is to get it back. So every time somebody owes us something, it's a debt that they need to pay. Maybe it's a favor, who knows, right? You gave somebody a ride to the airport, and so now you're going to the airport and you're like, hey, can you make this even and give me a ride to the airport? Because that's what often happens, is that if we loan somebody something, we do something for someone, it is a debt. And the only way to get that resolved is to get that thing back. Whether it's we loan somebody something, they pay us the money they owe us, or maybe they return a favor that we did for them. Well, when we talk about forgiveness, forgiveness is really all about canceling a debt. Forgiveness is saying, you owe me, and yet I'm not going to ask you to repay something. That's what forgiveness is. It's just saying, hey, whatever money you owe me, whatever favor you did for me, whatever you have that I loaned you, just keep it, and it's okay. Recently, I made a bet with someone over a football game. This team was playing Georgia, and everybody knows, and if you don't know, my favorite team is Georgia. And this person said, hey, well, if my team beats Georgia, then you wear the jersey of this team. And I said, sure, not a problem. And they said, well, what do you want in return? I said, if Georgia wins, I just really don't need anything in return. Like, I'm just good with us winning. Well, Georgia ended up winning. And so anytime we talk about forgiveness, it really is canceling a debt. But I want to talk about a different aspect of forgiveness here for just a moment, because here's the thing. Forgiveness is often this kind of nebulous feeling that we have, or unforgiveness is this nebulous feeling that we have, and because we don't know what the debt is. We don't know what the thing was that they need to repay us. Oftentimes it's unnamed. Oftentimes we don't really know what the issue is because we don't really think about it. So let's talk about a few scenarios real quick about unforgiveness and forgiveness. So let's say somebody took your job opportunity. They took your job opportunity, which means they took the opportunity for you to provide for your family. They took the opportunity for you to move up the ladder, and therefore what they took really is your ability to fulfill your family's financial dreams and hopes for the future. So you might be angry or frustrated, and you're like, man, I'm upset at that person, not that they just took my job, because it meant more than that. They took your reputation. The community looks at you different. Your neighbors aren't as friendly. And so when you think about taking your reputation, it's just more than that, because all of a sudden people have a different perspective of who you are in the place that you live. And so therefore, they took your peace and your comfort in the place that you live, because now when you walk down the street, see somebody in the grocery store, there's something, a mark on you or whatnot. How about this one? They took your marriage. They took your ability to tuck your kids in at night. They took your security and relationship. So if your marriage dissolves, it's a completely deeper issue than just losing your spouse. Your hopes and your dreams when you said I do, your kids and being around them and being a part of their life, all of that is in jeopardy. The peace of having a relationship and a covenant relationship, it's all out the window. And so when we talk about forgiveness, it's so important for us to be able to name it. It's so important for us to be able to name the deeper issue that goes beyond the action, to actually seek true forgiveness for the places that we are harboring resentment, bitter, frustrated, and angry about. Because here's the deal. We have to identify what was taken so we can decide what the debt is. If we don't know what the debt is, somebody's always going to owe us something. And if we can never name the debt, we'll try to forgive and we'll try to forgive, but we'll forgive for the wrong things, and there'll still be the deeper issue at hand. And as long as we harbor unforgiveness for something, the longer we're shackled to our past. And the longer we are shackled to our past, the longer we are defined by our past. So when we talk about forgiveness and unforgiveness, it really goes deeper. And we have to be able to name the really deep thing that's at the bottom of our heart that becomes problematic for us to get over, so that we're not canceling false debts and so that we're not stuck in the past and that we can move forward. Because here's the thing, and what we're going to see through our story. Forgiveness unshackles us from our past. When you and I are able to cancel the debt and we are able to forgive, we are able to actually move on with our life. And there's a story in Luke 7, and we're going to share about a woman who comes before Jesus and the Pharisees, and Jesus forgives her debt. And it's just a powerful example of the way that Christ sees the debts that we owe him and how he forgives those and how he calls us to forgive others. So verse 36, Luke chapter 7, it says this: one of the Pharisees asked to eat with Jesus, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. So Jesus is eating in the Pharisee's home just like he ate in the tax collector's home. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair of head and kissed his feet and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who was touching him. So the Pharisees are saying if Jesus was really who he says he was, he would know who this woman was. He would know exactly what she had done, and therefore he would not want her to touch him. But Jesus responds differently, but remember, because he champions the untouchables. For she is a sinner, the Pharisee said. And Jesus answering said to Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered it. Simon said, well, say it, teacher. Jesus in verse 41 begins to tell a story. He said a certain moneylender had two debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debt of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, for whom he canceled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Verse 44, then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them from her hair. You have given me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Verse 47, therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. And he said to her, your sins are forgiven. Then those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, who is this who even forgives sins? And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Now go in peace. It's a great story of the idea that the greater the debt, the greater the forgiveness. And the greater the forgiveness, the greater of gratitude that we have that our debt is canceled. And so forgiveness unshackles us from our past. In this moment, Jesus has this interaction with this woman, and no longer is she shackled by her past. Jesus pronounced that she is forgiven, that she is clean, that she is whole, that she can go in peace. And he does it in front of the religious leaders. And so Jesus usurps their authority, puts himself in authority, and says, now you are forgiven. And he does it in the middle of everybody that would pronounce her unclean. And so now what happens when she walks among the streets, when she goes about her day, when she goes about her business? People may look at her and say, well, you're unclean, you did this. But Jesus, who says, I'm Lord, has now pronounced her clean. And so it gives her a completely different perspective in the community. He canceled a greater debt. Jesus even says her sins are many. They're a lot. So the Pharisees and the people who are judging her, they're right. Her sins are many. There's a lot of them. But Jesus forgives them. And he unshackles her from her past. So I want to give us some principles to think through when it comes to forgiveness. First, forgiveness frees you. I was talking to a pastor one time, and he was an older pastor, probably had been 30 years as a pastor compared to me. And I said to him, I said, what do you do when you deal with people who are critical and people who hurt you and all of those types of things? I was like, how do you even continue to have hope in people? And he said to me, he said, you have to forgive. He said, you just have to forgive. He said, but I want you to think of it this way. He said, you don't forgive just for them, you forgive for you. Because if you hold on to every criticism, every hurt, every sabotage, everything, every no vote, if you hold on to that, it will eat you alive and you'll have no peace. Jesus says to this woman, you're forgiven, now go in peace. Forgiveness frees you. And if you think about it in that perspective, if you think about it from that perspective, it may be easier to forgive. Because I think a lot of times our perspective is this, well, I'm not going to forgive them because they haven't sought forgiveness from me. And we look at it in that debt-to-debtor relationship. We say, well, until they repay me, I can't forgive them. But what we do when we do that is we live our life stuck in the unforgiveness. We live our life stuck with the debt. We live our life stuck in that place. And what forgiveness really does is it allows us to let go of it, and it frees us. It allows us to move forward while forgiving what has happened in the past and forgiving the debt and saying, you know what? You don't owe me anything anymore. I'm moving beyond it. And I'm going to live my life in peace, and I'm going to live my life in freedom. So one principle of forgiveness is this, is that forgiveness frees you. So let's change our perspective a little bit and say, maybe they don't deserve to be forgiven. Maybe they've never asked for forgiveness. Maybe their debt that they give us that they owe us is so great, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to forgive it so that I can move on with my life and follow Jesus and love the people around me and actually do it as this woman left the Pharisee's house in peace. Forgiveness frees you because forgiveness unshackles us from our past. Forgiveness and tolerance are different. That's another principle. I found this quote, and actually in my notes, I didn't even write down who wrote it. So it's somebody's quote. It's definitely not mine. But this is what it says. It says, you can forgive someone of almost anything, but you cannot tolerate everything. We don't have to tolerate what people do just because we forgive them for doing it. Forgiveness heals us personally. So it goes back to point one. Forgiveness heals us personally. But to tolerate everything only hurts us all in the long run. So forgiveness and tolerance are different. You can forgive somebody of their actions, but you don't have to tolerate their behavior. You can forgive somebody for what they did in the past, but if they continue that same behavior, it doesn't mean that you have to continue in that relationship and tolerate them and to get hurt over and over and over again. You can forgive, but you don't have to tolerate. If somebody is acting in a way that is abusive, manipulative, guilt, makes you feel guilty, all of those types of things, you can forgive them for what they've done, but it doesn't mean you have to tolerate what they've done. It doesn't mean that you have to continue to do that. And I think sometimes we have this belief that if we forgive someone, then that's also tolerance. That meaning that we forgive someone means that, oh, we're good with how they are behaving or how they're going to treat me, even though we know that they're going to treat me the same way down the road. That's completely false. Forgiveness and tolerance are two different things. You can forgive, but it doesn't mean you trust. You can forgive, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have that tight of a relationship. You can forgive, but it doesn't mean that you're going to forget. Forgiveness is canceling a debt. It's not forgetting what everybody else has done. It's saying, in light of what you've done, I'm still going to choose to forgive you, and I'm not going to try to repay evil for evil. I'm not going to try to get back at you. I'm not going to try to do those types of things. And yet, I'm going to move on, and I'm going to wisen up and know I still don't have to tolerate that. So forgiveness and tolerance are different, because if we continue to tolerate the things that we've had to forgive, it's only going to hurt us more and more in the end. And to be honest with you, it's going to hurt the other person in the end, because they're going to say, you know what? I can continue doing this. They'll take me back. They'll forgive me. It'll be okay. And they'll never grow. Sometimes we have to forgive and move on so other people can grow and so that we can grow. Forgiveness unshackles us from our past. Just because you forgive doesn't mean you have to tolerate what people have done to you in your past. Forgiveness is an intentional daily act. Jesus is asked, well, how many times should I forgive someone? In Matthew 18:22, and Jesus says this, he says, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. In my last church, one of our elders had worked in our town at a camp. And that elder had gone through some really, really difficult things with employment, with his family, and ultimately left the camp. And they decided to stay in the area, and he was an elder, and he was a great friend, a good man. And we were talking one day about forgiveness and unforgiveness, and this elder said to me, he said, every single morning when I drive to work, which is 50 minutes away instead of 10 minutes away, I drive by the road where that camp is on. And every single day, I think about what could have been, what happened, and every single day, some of the same emotions pop up. That event happened 5 years ago. And he said, but every single day, as I drive by, I have to pray and I have to intentionally choose to forgive the people who did it, the people who work at the camp now, and let it go. He said, forgiveness is a daily, an intentional daily decision to say, I'm choosing to forgive. Not forgetting, not tolerating, not trusting, but I'm going to forgive. I'm going to let it go. God, help me forgive. Guys, forgiveness is a daily intentional act. If there is something that has happened to you in your past, you are going to wake up some mornings and you're going to want to go and avenge that. You're going to wake up and you're going to want to go post stuff on Facebook. You're going to wake up and you're going to want to go have that conversation. You're going to wake up and you're going to have that feeling pop up. You're going to wake up and think all the things that you should have done to make it different and all that kind of stuff. You're going to wake up and say, I'm justified in holding a grudge. I'm justified in holding a debt. I'm justified in wanting someone to come and seek that forgiveness and tell me that they did me wrong. And you know what? Even if they did, even if they do, even if they don't, forgiveness, like Jesus said, it's not just 7 times, it's 77 times. It's over and over and over again. It's an intentional daily act that we have to choose and say, God, I'm going to forgive them today. And the next day, you may have to say the same thing. And when you see them at the store, you might have to say the same thing. And when you see them on Facebook, you might have to see the same thing. It's a daily intentional act to forgive and say, I'm going to let go of the debt that you owe me. Because forgiveness unshackles us from our past. And forgiveness leads to peace. Peace is so important. When this lady is told, hey, go in peace. You're forgiven, now go in peace. It's because when we forgive, we experience peace. And I have this backpack. You know, this backpack right now is full. And if I just put it on my back, at first, it's not that heavy. It's not really that heavy at all. I can carry it around. And for some of you, you're thinking of a person or a scenario and you're like, well, I'm harboring unforgiveness and it's just really not heavy right now. I can carry this around my whole life. I'll function fine. I'll be fine. All of those types of things. But here's the thing, unforgiveness never stays stagnant. It always grows. Just like the weight of this backpack, it doesn't stay stagnant. The weight of this backpack isn't going to feel the same way it does right now, an hour from now, 2 hours from now, 3 hours from now, because gradually the weight that is in this backpack is going to get heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier. And if I were to wear it for 8 hours, and I were to give this sermon 8 hours from now, my back's going to be hurting, my shoulders are going to be sore, I'm probably going to be sweating from carrying it around, and I'm going to be ready to take it off. But that's what unforgiveness does. It never stays stagnant, it always grows. And the only way to lighten the load is to take the load out. The only way to lighten the load of the unforgiveness that we carry is to take a little bit out at a time and say, I'm going to forgive this time, and I'm going to forgive this thing, and I'm going to forgive this situation, and I'm going to forgive this person with this conversation, and I'm going to forgive, so that over time, that backpack becomes lighter and lighter and lighter. Our life becomes lighter and lighter and lighter. Our emotions become lighter and lighter and lighter. And we have more peace today or in the future than we did later. Don't you think that when that woman left the Pharisee's house, what Jesus did for her, don't you think she walked out and she was super light and she was excited and she was thinking, I've got a new lot in life. I've got a new identity. That's because she's no longer shackled by her past. She's now freed, because that's what forgiveness does. Forgiveness frees us from the shackles of our past. And it says, I'm going to cut you free. I'm going to give you a new lot in life. Now, for our online audience and for those in our harvest homes, I want to share another story with you that I think is very, very important. The Pharisees brought a woman to Jesus who was caught in adultery. And they began to ask him some questions about forgiveness and who she was and all this kind of stuff. And they were doing that to try to trap him. And in that moment, Jesus bends down and writes something to her in the sand. And then he stands up and he looks at the crowd and he says, those without sin cast the first stone. And slowly but surely all those people began to go away. They walked away, and he said to her, he said, so who is condemning you now? Who is casting the stone? She said, nobody. He said, and neither do I. It's a powerful story of forgiveness, but it's also a powerful story of what Jesus does for us. For 2,000 years, people have written in books, what did Jesus write in the sand? Most commentaries, when you get to that passage of Scripture, that's exactly what it'll say. What did Jesus write in the sand? And people will think, oh, he wrote, your sins are forgiven, or this, and he wrote this scripture, or he wrote that. But here's the thing, for 2,000 years, nobody's really known. But I've had a seminary professor one time say that he shared that story with his daughter and said, what do you think the meaning of it is? And his daughter said this, she said, isn't it like Jesus to take the emphasis off of us and put it on himself? Because from that moment on, for 2,000 years, nobody's concerned about the woman. They're not concerned about her adultery. They're concerned about what Jesus wrote in the sand. That's what Jesus does. That's the forgiveness Jesus gives us. As he says, I'm no longer going to make it about you. I'm going to make it about me. Because I'm the one that hung on the cross and took that sin from you and forgave you on that moment. In that moment. Just want to invite you, if you want to put your faith in Jesus, that you can pray and seek God, or you can message us, or you can talk to your Harvest Home leader and say, hey, I'd love to have more of a conversation about how to be in a relationship with Jesus, because that's why Harvest Church exists, so that all people may know Jesus and grow with him. And so what is the thing that you need to forgive? Who is the person that you need to forgive? What is the circumstance, the situation, the debt that leaves you shackled by in your past? What is the thing that you need to begin to lay at Jesus' feet and allow him to say you are forgiven, so that you can leave and walk in peace? Whatever that is, whatever forgiveness looks like, my encouragement is, do it. Begin that process. God bless you.